start making the hose. What's up guys, Tom with Verus Engineering, and today we're going to be installing the AOS on a VA WRX.
The Verus Engineering Air Oil Separator features a 3-stage filtration system for your PCV system. First and foremost, it features 4 desiccant filters, which filter down particles down to the 5-micron size. So this wicks the oil and the water out of the air flow.
All right, so the first step that we're going to take here is gaining access to the working area, and by basically removing the upper engine cover, which I unclipped earlier, and the air duct, again, which I unclipped earlier, we're gonna have the ability to see our full working area. I'll give you a shot of that in a second, but basically we're gonna start with removing the top mount intercooler. That way we have access to the coolant lines and a couple of the PCV lines that we need to get to. Once we remove the upper engine cover and the air duct, this is basically what you're left with here. We're gonna remove this 12mm bolt, this 12mm bolt, and I like to remove the bracket with these 2 bolts as well. That'll help us get the intercooler loose, and then we'll undo the hose clamp for the throttle body connection, and we'll take this intercooler out of the way. Okay, so we have the intercooler off of the car now. The next step is to remove the throttle body coupler that goes from the intercooler to the throttle body. That'll give us a little bit better access to the coolant lines that we need to install the cooling add-on to the AOS. And we'll go ahead and do that right now. This is a pretty easy task. Basically just gonna use a flathead screwdriver and undo the hose clamp, attaching it to the throttle body. One thing that I do like to do is mark or index the coupler with the correct side going to the throttle body. It just helps later on to make things a lot easier. All right, so we have the throttle body coupler removed now. What we're doing here is clamping off the 2 coolant lines that go to the throttle body, which we'll use for the coolant add-on to the AOS. Right now, we're not gonna disconnect them. We're just gonna block them off and get ready for when we actually do connect them to the AOS. However, make sure you know the engine's not hot while you're trying to do any of this. It is a pretty tight area. You don't want to burn yourself. When you take this off, have a small rag handy. It's gonna leak. It's gonna dribble just a little bit. Basically, clamp these off with either these hose clamps. You can get them at Amazon or a hardware store or something like that, or you can use a pair of needle nose vice grips, kind of like this. It doesn't matter. Just if you're using the vice grip style, make sure you don't tighten them too much. You don't want to damage any of the hoses. So we'll get right to mounting the AOS now. This is where we'll be mounting the AOS to the firewall. We're going to use this hole here. We'll need to remove this gray plug in order to get access, and we'll install a rivet nut there. And we will also need to remove this clip. It's kind of hard to see. It's a little small. I can't fit the camera in here. But there's a clip holding this harness on the other side of the firewall that will essentially just be left inside of the firewall. Once we undo that clip, we're gonna install a rivet nut in there as well. When I'm done installing them, I'll show you guys what it looks like. Okay, so with the harness clip removed or pushed into the firewall and that gray rubber plug removed out of the firewall, it'll expose 2 holes. They're about 1/4 inch in diameter. We're gonna install 2 rivet nuts like this. Hard to see on camera, but we're gonna pop up a little diagram. That way you can pause it and read it a bunch of times or come back to it or something. Just follow the directions. We're gonna go ahead and install them now. Okay, so we have the rivet nuts installed onto the bulkhead. The next step that we're gonna do is assemble the coolant add-on onto the bracket, which will be attached to the AOS before we put it onto the bulkhead. I'll show you guys what I mean in a second. But basically, we'll need to attach all that all at once, and then we'll remove the hoses or the hose clamps off of the hoses that we put on earlier and get ready to line everything up and cut the hoses to length. Okay, so we have the rivet nuts installed into the bulkhead. The next step that we're going to do, if we have or if you purchase the coolant add-on for your AOS kit is we need to add the plate for the coolant kit here, bolt everything up to the bracket, then bolt the bracket up temporarily to the firewall or the bulkhead. And we need to then basically measure the hose length from the throttle body, where we'll be tapping our coolant from, into both of the hoses. These are banjo fittings that go into the AOS, so they will be clockable in 360 degrees, which is the next thing that we'll need to sort out, is what angle and what position that we want them in order to route the hoses correctly. So we'll go to a close-up real quick, and I'll show you guys how to do that. All right, here we've got the AOS and bracket assembly. We went ahead and bolted the bracket to the cooling plate to the AOS. Basically, the cooling plate will sandwich in between the bracket and the AOS itself. We've got 16 millimeter long M6 by 1.0 button head cap screws with 12 millimeter washers. We also set up one of the banjo bolt fittings for the coolant add-on tentatively. Basically, I'm pretty sure it's going to end up going this way towards the throttle body. Down here, we've got kind of an exploded view of the banjo bolt. You're going to have the banjo bolt, slide one of the aluminum crush washers on it, and then you'll slide the banjo fitting, and then you'll have another crush washer, and they'll basically seal against the banjo itself, and that's going to go here. I'm going to loosely install this. Then we're going to bolt the bracket up with these two bolts here to the rivet nuts we installed on the bulkhead. And then we're going to start to run the hoses in a manner that will make sense, and then we'll be able to cut them to length. So we'll go ahead and do that now, and then we'll be back and show you what the deal is. All right, so down here you can see the one hose going here to the throttle body fitting, and the other hose going there to the fitting coming off of the engine, or pipe coming off of the engine, and they both run back to the AOS. We've got the banjo lines clocked in the right direction and everything. You may need to loosen or remove this bolt here, which will allow you to move this whole fuel line assembly without disconnecting any of the lines. Basically, that will give you access to that guy down there, which can be a little bit difficult to get to. That's basically it for this. We've got this line still clamped off here again, just for safety purposes. Well, not safety, but so that the coolant doesn't pour out everywhere. But here are the lines. We're gonna move on to the AOS line routing now. We are now done with the coolant line. Okay, so just to clarify on that last shot, it's kind of tight in there, but this is the hose that you're basically removing out of the car, and you're putting one hose on where this would have gone, which is the heater pipe, and the other side where this would have gone, which is the throttle body side. So again, just so that you have a visual aid, here is the hose that you will be essentially replacing with the AOS in between. Okay, so we have the heater or coolant setup all done. So now we've switched gears to the PCV setup. So what I'm showing you guys now is the PCV fitting or barb adapter that we've included in the kit. Basically, we're gonna replace that PCV valve with the barb that I have shown here, and you can kind of see where it is in relation to the intake manifold. Gotta refocus this in a second, but here is the PCV that we have replaced or removed out of the block and put into the AOS. We're gonna basically connect the PCV hose to the intake manifold, and we're gonna connect the barb fitting on the block to the AOS. Down here you'll see that we've replaced, or we've added the length of hose that's required in order to get this fitting connected back to the AOS. This car has a AOS drain back kit, so you'll notice that there is a Y fitting here. If you don't have the drain back kit, it'll just be one continuous line going back up to the AOS. Previously, what we did also when we removed the PCV valve from down in there was we removed this hose. And this hose, you'll notice, has two different diameters on it. One is 3/8, the other one is 1/2 inch. So what we've gone ahead and done is make this hose with the, oops, gotta figure out the correct focusing here. So we've adapted it from a 1/2 inch hose to a 3/8 hose, and we're gonna connect this to the manifold. Bear with me, this is kind of a tough shot to get, but there is a nipple you can see down in here. You can see right there in between that guy. That is the 1/2 inch side of things, and the PCV side is the 3/8 inch side of things. So I'm gonna go ahead and install that, and I'll show you guys what it looks like when it's done. So our hoses ran for the PCV side of things. You can see here, for the purposes of this video, I just applied clamps to the hose assembly that I put up. You can do that if you'd like to. The likelihood of them popping off is pretty low, but I like to be safer than sorrier. Like, I don't know. So we're gonna go ahead and start with the breather side of things now. So we got 1 and 2 nipples here. We're basically going to make the AOS go in between these two connections. So by doing that, we're gonna connect this side to one of the nipples. We're gonna connect this side to the other nipple. And what we are gonna do is basically Dremel this or cut this piece, this one-time clamp off. And by doing that, we basically leave the car in a state where it can go back to stock. We just need to replace this hose clamp in the future and connect these two pieces back together. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut that off now, and then we're basically going to adapt this hose into a 1/2 inch, and then we're gonna adapt, we're gonna take this with the 1/2 inch hose and run it back to here. So we'll do that now, and then we'll be back. All right, so this is the clamp cut, removed from the car. Nothing crazy, just cut it right down the middle. Just don't damage the hose. And now we're going to go and start making the hose. All right, we've got the clamp cut off, and we've adapted the 3/4 inch hose off of the factory tube here to the hose that we provide in the kit. You can run this hose up and over the way it is from the factory and connect it to the PCV, or the AOS if you'd like, or you can do what we've done here and route it underneath the charge piping. You can see the other side of the factory pipe here, that hose that came up from the lower end of the charge piping, we've tucked down underneath. Just make sure you're not crushing the hose or pinching it in any way. You want to make sure that, you know, obviously everything can still flow through there, but here's the other end of that 3/4 inch hose. And we've chosen to place our adapters, can't really see them, basically right under here. This should net like a real clean setup. Obviously we'll have some glamour shots in a minute, but as far as install, this thing is basically good to go. All we need to do now is put the intercooler back on and slap the cover and the air duct that we took off earlier back on. I'm probably gonna tidy things up with a couple of zip ties, especially that area over there. And I like to put some zip ties on, at least zip ties, on all of the barb connections. Just some added security. But I'm gonna go ahead and do that now, and then I'll show you guys what it looks like when everything's back on. All right, so I installed the engine cover back onto the engine. as well as the air duct back onto the car. As far as the hose routing is concerned, we opted to route the hoses underneath the charge pipe like you see here. Everything kind of tucks under real nicely. You can't really see it too much. You can see here everything really seems to flow really well. This hose here, the biggest thing is you want to make sure it doesn't kink when it's routed underneath the charge pipe. Basically, it's a big hose and you're going to have a lot of length here going back to the AOS. But again, the biggest thing here is just make sure that it does not kink. If you want, you can route it above the charge pipe, but that's up to you. All right, guys, that's going to wrap up the installation on the VA WRX AOS. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, be sure to email us at sales@verus-engineering.com, and we'll see you later.